Tokyo's night sky shimmered like polished obsidian as Flight 782 descended toward Haneda Airport. The plane glided low over the glittering coastline, city lights stretching endlessly across the horizon. Inside the cabin, Keanu Reeves sat quietly by the window, watching the neon metropolis drift into view. He had always loved Japan, its calm, its discipline, its sense of harmony. Tonight should have been no different. He was here for a private charity event, nothing more. A peaceful visit, a brief escape, but something inside him tightened with a sense of unease. The kind of instinct you don't learn, you're born with it. A whisper of danger hiding beneath calm waters. As the aircraft touched down, the wheels screeched softly, and a gentle vibration hummed through the floor. Passengers stretched, laughed, checked their phones. Keanu gathered his bag, nodded politely at the flight crew, and stepped into the jet bridge. A soft, cool breeze drifted in from the airport ventilation, carrying the faint scent of coffee, polished floors, and distant ramen shops. Inside the terminal, everything gleamed. Haneda's night shift was quiet, almost serene. Digital boards glowed above, displaying flights in brilliant blues and whites. Neon advertisements flickered softly, casting reflections across the polished marble floor. Keanu walked with his calm, thoughtful pace, waving quietly to a few passengers who recognized him. Even in a crowd, he moved like a ghost, gentle, unobtrusive, respectful. But tonight, some eyes weren't looking at him with admiration. They were watching him with precision. Keanu didn't notice the group of men in dark coats positioned on the upper mezzanine, communicating through discreet earpieces. Nor did he see the two foreign agents standing near the immigration gates, staring at him too intently. He approached the immigration counter. A young Japanese officer bowed politely, taking his passport. "Welcome to Japan, Mr. Reeves," he said with a warm smile. Keanu smiled back. "Good to be here." The officer began scanning the passport, but the machine froze. A soft red light blinked. The officer frowned, scanned it again. This time the screen flashed access restricted. His smile faded into confusion. "One moment, please," he said, tapping the monitor. Keanu tilted his head. "Everything okay?" Before the officer could answer, a blaring siren erupted above them, loud, sharp, metallic, the kind of alarm that doesn't belong in an airport unless something is terribly wrong. Passengers gasped. Heads turned. Keanu's eyes narrowed. That doesn't sound good. Suddenly, from both sides of the terminal, a team of American federal police officers stormed in, black tactical uniforms, heavy boots, vests marked U.S. Federal Unit. Their presence was so out of place, so aggressive, it rippled shock waves through the Japanese staff. "Target located," one of them shouted. "Move in." Keanu stepped back instinctively. "Move in. Target." Chaos erupted across Tokyo Haneda Airport like a sudden storm. The soft hum of late-night travelers turned into gasps, shouts, and frantic whispers as the squad of American Federal Police officers charged into the terminal. Their heavy boots struck the polished floor with military precision, echoing through the wide hall like thunder. Keanu Reeves stood frozen for the smallest moment, instinctively analyzing the scene. This wasn't normal. Not in Japan. Not at an international airport where authority, order, and respect guided every action. The first officer pushed through the crowd, shouting commands in English. "Clear the walkway! Move! Move!" Passengers backed away in fear, creating a path. Japanese airport security hesitated, confused and alarmed. Some reached for radios. Others tried to communicate with the American officers. But the response was the same. "No interference. We have jurisdiction over the target." The target. Keanu felt every muscle in his body tighten. "This isn't right," he muttered under his breath. The officer at the immigration counter, still holding Keanu's passport, looked even more terrified than the passengers. "Mr. Reeves, I don't understand." "They didn't send any protocol?" Before he could finish, two American officers slammed, their hands on the counter, and ripped the passport from his grasp. The young Japanese officer stepped back, shaking. "Keanu Reeves!" the lead American agent barked. "Hands where we can see them. You're coming with us." Keanu raised his hands slowly, palms outward, keeping his voice calm. "I'm not resisting. But what is this about? Why is the U.S. federal unit detaining me in Japan? No answer. Only cold eyes. One officer reached for his wrist. Keanu didn't fight, but he did speak, firm, controlled. At least tell me the charge. The second officer leaned in, face blank behind dark glasses. You don't need to know. Cameras flashed behind them. Someone was recording. Someone was shouting in Japanese. This is illegal! They can't arrest someone without authorization. But the Americans ignored everyone. Their formation was tight, aggressive, too aggressive. It felt less like an arrest and more like a kidnapping under political cover. Keanu kept breathing slowly, controlled. He had seen violence. He had survived danger. But this was different. This was orchestrated. The handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists with a metallic bite. Keanu flinched at the cold steel. Not from fear, but from the chilling realization that whoever orchestrated this wanted zero witnesses, zero process, and zero explanation. Another officer stepped forward, pressing a heavy hand on Keanu's shoulder. Move! Keanu walked, surrounded by armed men who shoved aside anyone who got too close. Behind them, Japanese airport authorities desperately tried to intervene. Wait, this is not approved. Stop! No foreign unit can detain someone on Japanese soil without protocol. Still no response. The atmosphere inside Haneda Airport cracked like thin glass under pressure. What had begun as a quiet, orderly night instantly transformed into something surreal, something out of a political thriller rather than real life. Japanese passengers stared in disbelief. Some clutched their suitcases to their chests. Others froze mid-step, unable to process what they were seeing. American federal police operating aggressively on Japanese soil. Japan valued order above all else. Calm, respect, procedure. What was happening right now violated all three. The American officers moved with an intimidating unity. Their dark armor, heavy gear, and cold precision seemed designed to crush opposition before it could start. But the Japanese airport authorities were not accustomed to being bulldozed. They scrambled, calling supervisors, radioing security towers, trying to understand how foreign-armed officers had entered their airport without clearance. A middle-aged Japanese security chief pushed through the crowd, shouting in both Japanese and broken English. Stop immediately! You cannot take detainee without protocol. This violates international... His voice was cut short by an American agent who stepped forward, raising a hand. Sir, you will stand down. This is a United States federal matter. This is Japan! The chief protested, voice trembling with frustration. You cannot operate here like this. People around them murmured anxiously. Travelers pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation. Within seconds, dozens of screens captured the moment. A Hollywood actor surrounded by armored men. A Japanese security team desperately trying to stop something deeply wrong. A group of elderly travelers whispered among themselves, Why America police here? This is not normal. Did he commit a crime? A young couple clung to each other, the girl whispering, They look like they're taking him by force. Even the immigration officer who had screened Keanu earlier stood frozen, staring helplessly as the situation spiraled. His hands shook. I scanned his passport. There was nothing wrong. Nothing at all, he murmured to himself. Keanu saw the confusion, the fear, the disbelief. He raised his voice, not with anger but with clarity. They don't have proof. They're not following law. Please, don't get hurt because of me. His words were noble, steady, and genuine. But the Americans didn't care. One of them shoved Keanu forward. Keep moving. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. A woman gasped. A little boy cried. Someone shouted, Don't push him like that! Another Japanese officer stepped forward, practically begging, Please, explain! What is your jurisdiction here? But again, the Americans acted as if no one else existed. Cameras continued to roll. People continued to whisper. Tension continued to rise like boiling water with no release valve. Something else added to the confusion. No embassy officials. No diplomatic escort. The world seemed to narrow into a cold, unforgiving tunnel as Keanu Reeves was forced toward the center of the immigration hall. Cameras flashed. People shouted. But the American officers moved like machines, unyielding, expressionless, and entirely focused on one target, him. Two officers tightened their formation, stepping closer on either side of Keanu, their armored shoulders, brushed against his arms, guiding him with force disguised as control. The grip on his left wrist tightened painfully. "Don't resist," one of them muttered. "I'm not resisting," Keanu replied calmly. "I'm asking for the truth." The officer didn't respond. He only pushed harder. Another officer pulled out a digital tablet. A flashing red screen displayed Keanu's photo, but the text beneath it was blurred, partially censored, almost as if the information wasn't meant to be seen by anyone outside the unit. Or perhaps no information existed at all. As they reached a wide open area of the terminal, the lead officer finally gave the order. "Cuff him." Keanu exhaled slowly. "I don't understand what grounds—" He didn't finish. Two officers grabbed his arms with brutal efficiency. One forced his wrists behind his back, twisting them into a position that made his shoulders burn with sharp pain. The metal cuffs clamped down with a harsh click, colder than ice biting into his skin. A wave of gasps traveled through the onlooking crowd. "He didn't fight. Why are they treating him like this? This is too extreme." A woman stepped forward, shaking. "Stop! He didn't do anything!" "I saw everything." A Japanese policeman tried to intervene as well, stepping between the officers. "You cannot arrest someone without cooperation with our—" He was shoved aside. The push wasn't gentle. The officer stumbled backward, nearly falling. The terminal erupted with angry shouts now. People could sense something was terribly wrong, something deeper than an arrest. Something coordinated, something hidden. Keanu turned his head toward the Japanese officer who had been pushed. "I'm sorry," Keanu said softly, voice sincere. "This isn't your fault." Those words, calm amid chaos, only made the situation more surreal. Keanu Reeves was being treated like a high-level criminal, yet he had the presence of someone who had done nothing wrong. One officer pulled Keanu's shoulder harshly. "Move!" Keanu steadied himself. "Where are you taking me?" "Classified," the lead officer snapped. "You have no jurisdiction here," Keanu insisted. "Japan is—" The officer leaned in close, whispering with a chilling tone that didn't match his calm face. "You're not in Japan anymore. Not legally. Not today." Keanu stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means," the officer said, gripping his arm harder, "we can do whatever we want." The crowd's shouting grew louder. Phones were everywhere now, recording everything. Every shove, every command, every violation. But the American officers didn't care. The automatic airport doors slid open with a sharp hiss, letting in a blast of cold night air as Keanu Reeves was dragged out onto the restricted runway zone. The darkness outside was broken only by scattered floodlights, glowing like isolated islands on the tarmac. The storm clouds above churned, threatening rain. The hum of aircraft engines vibrated through the ground, mixing with distant airport announcements that no one here cared about. The American officers moved fast now, faster than inside the terminal. Their formation tightened, their grips strengthened, and their silence became even heavier. They didn't want anyone stopping them out here. There were fewer cameras, fewer witnesses, fewer rules. Keanu stumbled slightly as they pushed him forward, the metal cuffs cutting deeper into his wrists. He tried to keep his balance, but with each shove, his frustration grew sharper. "This doesn't make sense," he said, his breaths visible in the cold air. "If I'm under arrest, then show the paperwork. Show the charges, anything." "You're not in a position to demand answers," the lead agent snapped. Another officer stepped beside him, his voice low and threatening. "Just walk." Keanu glanced around. Airport workers paused mid-task, frozen in confusion. A baggage truck operator stared wide-eyed, unable to believe what he was seeing. A runway marshal raised his hands in disbelief, shouting something in Japanese that the Americans didn't even acknowledge. They forced Keanu across the illuminated stretch of concrete toward a black armored vehicle, parked alone at the far end of the runway. It looked more like a military transport than anything a law enforcement group should be using in Japan. Thick plating, reinforced windows. No license plates. "Where did you even get this vehicle?" Keanu asked. The agent closest to him smirked. "You'd be surprised what the U.S. government can get when it wants someone." The words weren't meant to comfort. They were meant to warn. A sudden boom echoed overhead, thunder rippling across the sky. A cold drizzle began falling, the raindrops bouncing off the vehicle's black metal surface like tiny hailstones. The agents didn't slow down. They pulled Keanu toward the open rear door of the vehicle. Inside, the space was dim, lined with steel benches and metal restraints bolted into the walls. It didn't look like a transport truck. It looked like a cage. Keanu planted his feet. "I'm not stepping inside until I know why." Two officers grabbed him by the arms and lifted, forcing him to bend. He struggled, not fighting, just resisting enough to demand respect. A knee pressed into his back. A hand grabbed his hair. A voice hissed in his ear, "We warned you. Start walking or we'll drag you." Keanu breathed slowly, grounding himself. He didn't want to give them the satisfaction of a reaction fine, he said quietly. "Do what you think you need to." The officers shoved him inside. He stumbled, hitting the metal floor with a dull clang. The armored vehicle screeched to a stop beside a dimly lit airstrip far removed from the main terminals. This wasn't a commercial runway. It wasn't even part of Japan's standard military grid. It looked like a forgotten corner of the airport, an area used only for operations. No one wanted to admit existed. Rain fell harder now, pattering against the metal roof of the truck, echoing inside the dark compartment where Keanu Reeves sat against the cold wall. His wrists throbbed from the cuffs, but his mind remained sharp, scanning every detail around him. He felt the shift in the air before he heard the door. Clang! The rear door swung open. A blast of cold wind rushed in, carrying the scent of jet fuel and wet asphalt. Two officers grabbed Keanu by the arms and hauled him out. His boots hit the ground, splashing in a shallow puddle. Ahead of him waited a gray, unmarked military jet, sleek, predatory, silent. No logos, no country markings, no identification numbers, just a shadow in the rain. Keanu narrowed his eyes. "That's not a transport plane." The lead officer tightened his grip. "It is today." The group pushed him toward the boarding ramp. The engines hummed with a low, ominous vibration. This wasn't a normal extraction. This was covert, deliberate, illegal. The Japanese authorities were nowhere in sight. No diplomats. No airport supervisors. Nothing. It struck Keanu with chilling clarity. America didn't want witnesses. Inside the jet, the lighting was dim. Cold overhead strips casting harsh, unforgiving lines across the metal interior. It didn't look like a plane meant to carry people. It looked like it was designed to carry prisoners. A single metal chair sat bolted to the center of the cabin, restraints attached to the armrests. Keanu stared at it. "You're not serious." "Sit," an officer ordered. Keanu didn't move. "If this is a lawful arrest, then you don't need that chair." "If it's not..." He was cut off by a shove so sudden his knees buckled. Two officers forced him down onto the chair, locking his ankles and wrists into separate restraints. Metal clanked. Bolts tightened. Keanu winced at the pressure on his injured joints. Another officer stepped in front of him. Wearing a black mask that hid everything but a pair of cold, calculating eyes, the man leaned down, speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. "You're being transported to New York." Keanu met his gaze, refusing to blink. "On whose orders?" The masked man paused. "That information is restricted." "And the charges?" Silence. Rain drummed against the aircraft hull, growing louder. Keanu's heartbeat echoed in his ears, but his voice stayed firm. "You're breaking international law. You know that?" The masked officer didn't flinch. "We were instructed that you don't get a trial. You don't get a lawyer. You don't get contact." He stepped closer. "You're classified as high-risk detainment." Keanu's stomach sank, not from fear, but from realization. The descent into New York began long before the plane broke through the clouds. Keanu Reeves could feel the shift in altitude, through the pressure in his ears and the subtle tightening of the restraints that held him to the metal chair. He hadn't slept, not even for a minute. The entire flight had been cold, silent, and suffocating. There were no windows, no clocks, no announcements, just the steady, mechanical hum of the engines and the quiet murmur of American officers behind a closed bulkhead door. Hours passed, maybe 6, maybe 10. Time meant nothing inside that steel coffin of a jet. Then finally the engines dropped power. The jet tilted. Keanu braced himself. When the aircraft touched down, the landing wasn't smooth. The wheels slammed against the tarmac with a violent jolt. Keanu's restraints cut deeper into his wrists. He inhaled sharply. Wherever they had landed, it wasn't a commercial airport. There were no lights, no voices, no movement. The plane taxied for a long, slow minute before coming to a stop. A faint clunk echoed as the hatch unlocked. Cold air rushed into the cabin, carrying a harsh scent of diesel, wet concrete, and industrial metal, the kind of air that belonged to places never meant for the public. Two officers entered the cabin. "Stay still," one commanded. "As if I have a choice," Keanu murmured. They released his restraints but didn't give him time to stand. They grabbed him, one on each side, dragging him out of the chair. Keanu's legs were stiff from hours of immobility. He staggered before catching his balance. The officers led him toward the open hatch. Outside, the world was swallowed by darkness. Only a few dim floodlights pierced the night, illuminating a barren landing strip surrounded by tall fencing and razor wire. This wasn't JFK. This wasn't LaGuardia. This wasn't any civilian airport. This was a black site landing zone, a place for people who were never meant to be seen again. Keanu's breath fogged in the freezing air. Rain-slick pavement glistened beneath his shoes. He could see the silhouettes of heavily armed guards forming a perimeter. Straight ahead, waiting like a hungry beast, was another armored van, larger and more fortified than the one in Japan. Matte black, reinforced frame, no windows. A door opened. A man stepped out. Not a soldier, not an officer, but someone with authority heavy enough to bend worlds. His suit was immaculate, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark and assessing. "Mr. Reeves," the man said calmly, stepping closer. "Welcome back to the United States." Keanu's jaw tightened. "You going to tell me what this is about?" The man smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. "You're being processed for what crime?" The man paused, studying him with unsettling interest. "Some truths," he said softly, "never reach the public, and the people who know those truths must be contained." Keanu's heart pounded. Contained? For 6 years? Without trial? The metallic doors of the transport vehicle slammed shut with a resounding clang, leaving Keanu Reeves in near-complete darkness. The air inside was cold and sharp, biting at his skin. The faint hum of fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, barely illuminating the concrete walls of the cell. This was no holding area. This was a death cell, designed to break anyone who entered. Keanu's wrists were freed from the temporary restraints of the van, but his legs remained shackled to the floor. The chains rattled slightly as he shifted, the sound echoing through the small chamber like a warning. A single steel cot with a thin, threadbare mattress sat against one wall, along with a bare metal sink and a stainless steel toilet. No windows, no clock, no warmth, only cold, hard concrete and the endless hum of security machinery. A guard appeared briefly, slipping a thin tray of food through a small slot in the door. 6 years. "No visitors, no questions," the man said bluntly. His tone carried no malice, only the dispassionate monotony of someone following orders. Then he vanished, leaving Keanu alone again. Keanu knelt by the cot, eyes scanning the walls. Despite the grim reality, he forced himself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. Panic would only make this worse. Fear was natural, but it wouldn't win. He had survived impossible odds before. He would survive this. He pressed his palms against the cold floor and closed his eyes, trying to imagine the life he had just moments ago. Tokyo's neon lights, the warmth of conversation, the bustling airport, everything now felt distant, unreal. His world had narrowed to this small, suffocating cell. Yet even here, Keanu's mind refused to be caged. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had no meaning here. Every flicker of the lights seemed to stretch infinitely, and every sound, the distant footfall of guards, the mechanical hum of locked doors, felt magnified. He realized the most dangerous part of a death cell wasn't the confinement itself. It was the psychological isolation, the subtle crushing of hope until nothing remained but resignation. That would be easy for them to take from anyone, but not him. As he sat silently on the cold floor, something slid under the door. A piece of paper. Not much, just a folded sheet, damp at the edges. Keanu picked it up, careful not to make a sound. Written in hurried scrawl were fragments of information. Names, dates, references to hidden operations, evidence of a plot, proof that he had been framed. Someone had risked being caught just to let him know the truth. Keanu's eyes widened. His mind raced. A plan began to form even in the confines of this nightmare. The plot against him was massive, powerful, and deeply rooted. But this small slip, the paper, was a lifeline, a spark. For the first time since arriving, he allowed himself a small, determined smile. The guards may have controlled his body. The world may have deemed him lost. But his mind, his spirit. The cell was silent again, except for the steady drip of water somewhere in the corner, the faint hum of ventilation, and the occasional distant footstep echoing down the steel corridors. Keanu Reeves sat cross-legged on the thin mattress, staring at the sheet of paper slipped under his door. His fingers traced the jagged edges, and his eyes scanned the scrawled notes over and over, memorizing each detail. Each line told a story, one that painted a picture far more sinister than he could have imagined. At first glance, it appeared to be a trail of falsified evidence, manipulated dates, and fabricated charges, names of officials who no longer existed, references to accounts, bank transactions, and communications that never took place. Someone had deliberately framed him, but why? And who would go to such lengths to orchestrate this level of deception? These were not random enemies. These were people with resources, influence, and motives buried deep within the corridors of power. Keanu leaned back against the wall, taking a deep breath. The room was freezing. The harsh fluorescent light flickering overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The longer he stared at the cryptic notes, the more the threads of a larger plot began to emerge. He realized that this arrest, this forced extraction, was not just about silencing him, it was about control. Control over information, over influence, and over the narrative of truth. Whoever had done this had no intention of letting him walk away. For hours, or perhaps it was days. Time had no meaning. Keanu pieced together the puzzle. The coded references hinted at a network operating across continents. Corporate elites, shadow government operatives, and rogue intelligence agents. Each fragment of information suggested a larger, coordinated plan, and at the center of it all was him. Not by chance, not by error, but as a deliberate target. He had been chosen to disappear, erased from the world under the guise of legality, leaving no trace for anyone to follow. He pressed the paper against his forehead. Closing his eyes, the magnitude of it was staggering. He could be in this cell for years, isolated, monitored, and forgotten. Yet within the chaos of confinement, an ember of resolve ignited. He had survived countless threats before, both on screen and off. He understood fear, danger, and deception, but he had never faced a system so meticulously designed to strip a person of identity and hope. The challenge now was not just survival, it was strategy. Keanu rose to his feet, testing the metal chains that bound his ankles to the floor. Every movement was uncomfortable, every sound amplified in the echoing room. He didn't flinch. He calculated. If these people wanted compliance, he would give none. If they thought confinement would break him, they were mistaken. With every passing moment, he committed each piece of information to memory. Every name, every reference. Every hint of a larger conspiracy would be weaponized later. Time had blurred into an unending gray for Keanu Reeves. Days, weeks, months, perhaps even years were impossible to measure within the confines of the New York death cell. The sterile concrete walls, the metallic scent of the air, and the faint, monotonous hum of the ventilation system had become his constant companions. Yet amid the isolation, something stronger than despair had taken root. A burning resolve. Keanu had memorized every detail of the notes that had been slipped under his door. Every name, date, and reference had been etched into his mind with painstaking clarity. These fragments of intelligence were no longer just information. They were weapons, tools for dismantling the conspiracy that had imprisoned him. Every moment spent in that cold, unforgiving cell was a moment spent sharpening his understanding, plotting his return not just to freedom but to exposure. The guards continued their rotation, unaware of the strategy forming behind the calm, unyielding gaze of their prisoner. They delivered food, performed routine checks, and occasionally muttered complaints to one another, treating Keanu as if he were an object rather than a man. But he had learned to anticipate their movements, their routines, their weaknesses. Knowledge, after all, was his most potent ally. One evening, the distant echoes of footsteps stirred him from his thoughts. A new guard appeared at the door, holding a tray. But there was a hesitation in the man's step. a subtle flicker of curiosity or doubt that Keanu immediately sensed. He knew the moment was delicate. Influence in this environment was measured in whispers, glances, and strategic silence. Keanu let the moment linger, letting the guard perceive control where there was none. Subtlety would be his key, not brute force. He spoke softly, deliberately, almost to himself. 6 years, or the duration they choose to imprison me. But they cannot imprison the mind, they cannot imprison the truth, and the truth will have its revenge. As the weeks stretched into months, Keanu built a mental map of the network operating against him. He traced the flow of influence, the hidden connections, the paths of power and corruption. Each day was a rehearsal, each night a meditation. He imagined the world outside, the news that would never tell his side of the story, the faces of those who underestimated the reach of a determined man. His body might be caged, but his mind was a storm, gathering energy, building clarity, forging a plan that no cell could contain. And then a realization crystallized. This imprisonment was not just punishment. It was an opportunity. Every second in this cell allowed him to study, reflect, and prepare. Every guard, every surveillance camera, every procedural flaw became a clue to exploit. The conspiracy that had tried to erase him had underestimated one fundamental truth. Keanu Reeves did not surrender. He did not break. He did not fade quietly into obscurity.